welcome to our Finance and Performance meeting. Do we open this with the karakia? No, Josh is in charge of karakia. Any apologies? So I've got Councillor Dowsing. No, I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor Burdett. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Any declarations of interest? None. Let's go to our minutes. Our minutes on page 5. Any questions or queries? Thank you, Coral, for very thorough minutes. They summed up very well what we discussed. Any questions or queries? Councillor Pat and then Isaac. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move them, but it's just a couple of points in them, and because it was about the same time most of the council, a number of councillors went to the port company, and the comment on page 7 of 54 under 10.1 and the 4th bullet point, which say log retrieval was not necessarily the responsibility of the port.
What page are you on?
Page 7, and it's item 10.1.2.
Oh, yes.
The manager made it really clear that it is the responsibility of the port, and I don't know how we got that information. So it talks here about log retrieved from the harbour by contractors were either released into the ocean or towed back, which I think is not correct. It is the manager made it clear, and some of us were there and heard it. They are required to remove the logs that fall into the water, and we need to be correct about
So councillor is happy to change that, or should we note what was said at the meeting? Heather.
I'd like to then put in, when we've come to know matters arising from the minutes, that was incorrect information. If that's a tidy way to handle it, I'm raising it as incorrect.
Got that, Coral?
Information.
Thank you. Any other question? Oh, Councillor Hughes.
I was present at that meeting.
Right, so just let Coral know that's all good. Pat, you've got another question?
Just wanted to ask about item 10.4, and it's quite a way down, the Environment Services and Protection. We were going to be provided in due course with information, and this meeting was the 17th of February, and I just wondered if we could have some update on the swimming pool. Probably my matters arising, Madam Chair, and as I said, I'm happy to move it, so if you want me to wait.
Are you talking about the swimming pool fencing?
Yes, and we were going to be told in due course, and this council would be terribly embarrassed if a child were to have an incident in the swimming pool, so we do need to follow that up.
Can that please be added to the action sheet? Okay, any other questions? If not, I have a mover in Councillor Seymour, a seconder in Councillor Wharehenga. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. Let's move on to our long-term plan summary changes. So some of these items were changed since we first looked at them. Pauline, do you want to have a quick chat in regards to this paper?
Probably just as an overview, what we've been doing in the last 3 years is
24.
to be able to give you more accurate information and to report on in the year is to assess where projects are at any particular point in time and to update.
Excuse me, I just skipped a lot of stuff that I not. So I'm just going to go back so that we stay. I did not do the action sheet. Action sheet. Sorry, Pauline. Sorry, Coral. Action sheet. Any questions? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. Just an update, and I see we are later. I saw we are to get an update later around with respect to the exposed closed landfill at Tukumara Bay. I think if I read it, I know that it comes up later in the report. Am I right? That seems to be important. And then over the page on the action sheet, that ticks up those. Why can I? None of those things have happened, and the due date was the 8th to the 6th. Are we going to get that report next month? Because all three, the Waikanae to Waipo cycle trail repair report to council, the public transport passenger numbers, a report to council, and the PGF funding.
Mr. Wilson.
Through the chair, my understanding is those are on track for that due date.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, that's it.
Okay, any questions, queries in regards to the action sheet? If not, there's our governance work plan telling us what is on today and what will be at our next meeting on the 4th of August. Any questions in that regard? If not, we go to page 18. This is in regards to our funding assistant rate, our FAR rates and the reserves, and a request to bring some of that forward into this financial year. Mr. Wilson, welcome to the hot seat.
Morning, councillors. So this paper, just quickly, this is around the funding assistance rate reserve that we have set aside. This was a part of the change from the last regional land transport plan where Waka Kotahi changed the funding rates for footpaths and a couple of other things, which meant that we were able to build up this reserve that's been sitting to the side. What we're wanting to do, or the paper's proposing, is to use that reserve to enable us to undertake some emergency flood works that we need to do this financial year to attract the 88 cents in the dollar from Waka Kotahi. If we don't do it within this financial year, then the funding reserve rate drops back to 66 cents in the dollar after 30 June. So we're wanting to undertake the work now to attract the higher assistance rate. We've tapped all of our budgets, so we don't have any money left in roading to pay the local share because it's too late in the financial year for this. Hence why we're asking to bring forward some money from the funding reserve to be able to fund this work.
So we've only got 5 weeks left in this financial year. Yeah. Councillor Seymour, then Councillor Wharehenga. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move that. It seems that it's the right and proper thing to do to get and to make sure we do access the best subsidy. But I just wondered, what position will it leave us in this time next year? Will we have been looking for that level of money from the reserve?
So through the chair, this is separate from the emergency works fund. So this is not the emergency works budget that we have. This is the funding reserve that doesn't have a specific call on it at this stage. We're asking to go into it. It is unallocated. It's the money that you set aside for situations hopefully like this.
I'm happy to move, Madam Chair.
So I've got a second in Councillor Burdett. Anyone, Councillor Wharehenga, you all good? Everyone okay with that? All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Now we go to page 24. See, I was just fast. Okay, Pauline. Thank you.
So just to reiterate, this is kind of the process that we go into our annual plan or a long-term plan, and we do that prior to Christmas, and we estimate what that is going to be for the future years. When we get to this stage, we say, okay, there was some work that was committed to have completed in the previous year. Is it on track? Where do we need to assess it? And that's just most of this is the revising of where they will be completed by the 30th of June and then provisioning it for the next year. And if there's any other changes, like if there's additional grant funding or anything that wasn't in the LTP proper, this is actually trying to get it recognised with it. This is separate to the deliberations report that was decided. What are these projects that we wanted to bring in? This is an assessment of what are the projects, where they were at the 31st of December to where they are to the final. Happy to take any questions.
I had a question, and I'm not sure if it's in this paper. Somewhere, and I thought about it yesterday when we had our operations, there is a mention of the 1,000-year bridge. And I'm sure I saw something here about funding allocated for that. And I went through our budgets with a fine-tuned code, and I can't remember seeing that. So can you just talk to that a little bit? I hope it's part of this paper. I can't find it. What page? 27.
So with that, you won't find it in the
One
draft
point
because at that stage we didn't have the funding for it. But now funding has been confirmed for that. And so therefore, before we go into the final, is actually putting it into the year one.
So we have now received external funding. Is that correct?
So through your worship, we have grant funding for that from lotteries. If you recall, it was about 2.8 million. And then the bridge came back 5 million. And so we have been negotiating with lotteries around a reduced scope. So we can give you an update. Dave can give you an update on that after the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Page 27, paragraph 17, talks about the $11 million central government has funded for the new water reforms, and it talks how that money is to be divvied up. Yesterday's paper spoke several times about the $11 million coming to GDC in Hawke's Bay. This seems to say the money is coming to us alone. Can that point be clarified, please?
So you missed that bit yesterday morning. We had quite an extensive discussion in regards to that funding allocation. So remember when these water reforms started and they said the mayor needs to reach out. So I initially reached out to them. Half of our funding allocation was given to them. Half of our funding allocation was given to them. I had to reach out and say, hello, what are you guys doing? And then that was passed on. So that's where the mention of the Hawke's Bay is, but it is our money at this stage. Yeah.
Sorry for having to raise that for
No,
myself.
that's all good. Any other questions? Councillor
I'm happy
Foster.
to move the report.
Any more questions? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. I'm looking at carryovers, and on page 27 at 13, it talks about 10.9. And the spreadsheet's really great, thank you very much. And it does say that most of the carryover is the Olympic pool. But it's at 10.9 cumulative years, because if I run down column 2022 under carryover, page 27 and then 32 to the spreadsheet, 27 it says the carryover of 10 mil. But if you look down, so is it the cumulative figure over 3 years, which I see at the bottom? Because it looks to me like we've carried over 3.6 million from activities just into the 2022 year, because the amount of carryover shown there is 1.099 for the pool. So when you talk about carryovers at 10.9, that looks like 3 years of carryovers. Is that correct?
Chair, you're quite right, it is a bit confusing there. It is the total amounts of rephasing, and then some of it is the carryovers that actually occurred in the year one. So with the pool, there'll be the rephasing. It's not so much, we assume prior to, after the adoption of the annual plan, when the funding for the pool was received, we assumed that by the 30th of June that we would have completed, even with the central government funds, that we would have had about 8 to 9 million done, our proportion plus the others, but we know that that phase didn't occur. So I guess it's got a little bit caught up with that over conversation.
I'm not worried about the pool. I mean, we all know and understand where we're going with the pool. But I just think we're talking about carryovers, which if you look at the spreadsheet, which is page 32, and we've got 3 columns called carryovers. Well, in actual fact, we don't know their carryovers till we get to year end, surely. So we've got 3.6 million of projects that we should have completed in 2021, and we're going to carry them over to 2022. If we take it, and that's taking out, I'm taking the pool out at 1.09 and saying there's 3.6 million of other projects that weren't completed. And then again, in the next column, but I'm just a bit concerned at them being termed carryovers that far ahead, because, you know, it's a presumption then that the work is not going to be done. And this is some other terminology that, and our councillor auditor amongst us might have a view on this. But I am still concerned that we've got 3.6 million we rated for, even if it was only interest, that the work wasn't done, and potentially by year 2, because they're all noughts in the year 3 column, we've got 10 million of carryovers, and I'm going to get by then 7 million of it is the pool. But why are we calling them carryovers when they're not for 2023?
Through the chair, right, should have been changes. Instead of carryovers, it should have been /carryovers/changes from it. So it got caught up with the term of the carryover as opposed to what were the changes.
Yeah, what are the changes? And one further question, which is still on that page, and it comes in under the roading box. but it talks about forestry funds under pavement maintenance, renewal, forestry, and it talks about forestry funds. And so what
New
exactly?
budget. So 1.5 new budget over 3 years.
Yes, but so is that from the
What is that?
multiplier? I mean, forestry funds is not a good terminology because that could mean it's return on.
Mr. Wilson,
Through your worship, it is the forestry multiplier.
This is forestry.
thank
And
you.
would be better called the forestry multiplier,
Forestry
because
funds.
otherwise we could read it as a return on funds from sale of timber, which there is some in the district. So I do have concerns about the quantum of the carryovers, and yet I know it's a real challenge, and some of them quite small in some projects, but I'll ask about the interest costs when we get to that. Thank you for that.
Any other questions? Councillor Akuhata-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Pauline, I'm always interested in our writing commentary. It states grant funding. Do we have a list of where those grants, where's that grant come from? And I mean, with regard to the 1,000-year bridge, we know Lotto was mentioned, but I'm just interested to know, is it new grant monies, or, you know, within the grant framework, do we have a list of where we get those grants from?
Yes, we do. And we can specifically come back and say where the grants were. I mean, we have reported it, but as you say, as we go on, it's just understanding where we're assuming that the committed ones that we actually know are sort of included in there. As we go on in certain other projects, there's assumed that we will have to obtain grant funds to enable that project to occur. But yes, we can actually give an update on sort of ones that have been confirmed.
I guess I'm interested to know how much it would be a local grant as opposed to national grants funds. So, you know, the difference.
99.99% is national.
Okay, I have a mover in Councillor Foster. Yes, just use your microphone, please.
Go to the bottom of the spreadsheet, move to a bulk supply 500,000. Is that the exploratory work that, in terms of water supply? David, oh, thank you.
Was it a yes?
Yes.
Good, that was quick, smart. Any other questions or queries, councillors? If not, do I have a seconder for this paper? Councillor Sheldrake. So I have a mover in Councillor Foster, seconder in Councillor Sheldrake. All in favour, contrary, carried. So now we move to page 33. And that is our rates and sundry invoice debt management report. Interesting reading. Thank you, Pauline. I take it as read and I open it up for any discussion or queries. I was quite interested that 24% mortgagee processes are underway. Can you comment on that?
As a process, each year, they're not, we have to review where rates, arrears are. We have to notify the banks if there is outstanding on the rates. We can choose to proceed to do it or we don't, and we have not. We have basically just got they caught the debt collection. So
Touching base with it.
yeah, and we have to notify the bank if people have rates in arrears, and we notify them in that kind of a process.
That does not mean there are 24% of those currently houses being sold.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, Councillor Robinson, Hughes, Seymour, Faulkner. Thank you.
Thank you. So page 35, paragraph 13 sets out the amount of rates that are going to become time barred, $773,000, which is a not insignificant amount. I went through the document trying to work out how much is going to be coming into that category next year. And is that, I got several questions around this. So that 773, is that a kind of a standard amount that each year, the 6 years is rolled over and that's about the amount we're writing off each year?
Slightly more, you get interest accumulated on penalty interest. So it has been around about 6,700. It depends on, and as you accumulate compounding of the penalty interest, yes, that can be a little bit more. So it rises a little bit.
All right. And then my next question talks about paragraph 18, where you've cited section 65 of the Local Government Rating Act, which also says you can't collect rates after 6 years. But section 65(2) of the Act says that the 6-year limitation period doesn't start to run if you've currently postponed rates. So if you've arranged with someone and you're postponing their rates while you're trying to work that through, that 6-year period remains open. And I wanted to know, are we going to use that? Are we using that as a tool, or should we be using that as a tool? If we're not, we should be using it as a tool because it keeps our options and longer period availability for recovering rates. Because frankly, we shouldn't be, after 6 years, writing off $750,000 of rates every year, or $600,000 or $700,000. It means business as usual is not working properly when there are so many tools available to us. It's a lot of money that could be going back into this pūtea, into our community.
Yes, the short answer is yes, we can. And what we do, a lot of the things that have happened with things that are after 6 years is difficulty of finding to enter into arrangement, to actually identify that it is a postponement of rates. Because there is the landowner and all who is responsible for that means that it accumulates. But where possible, yes, we try to make sure that there is working arrangements with it.
Chair, can we be clear? It is over and above anyone in working arrangements, isn't it? They're not caught in the 6 years. If anybody's got a working arrangement to make a payment over time, they are not in the statute barred block.
They're accommodated then within our systems. It's people that don't engage in this. Thank you, Fiona.
As far as rates postponements go, we haven't really got a lot of rates postponements. We tend to make payment arrangements with people that see them clearing the rates within a 1 to 2 year period, and those work very, very well. Anything that is postponed, yes, it would still be active for collection at that 6 year period. So we are doing that, but like I say, we have not got a lot of rates under postponement.
Might I suggest that when you've got $773,000 coming up to click and fall off our books, the week before you send out a postponement notice to everybody and say, we're going to postpone your rates, and that holds the time lock. It holds it, it's time barred at that point. So you've got an opportunity to then recover those rates. It would be a very simple process, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Oh yeah, just 2 questions. First one is, what's our total rates write-off as percentage of income in relation to other councils? Do we kind of do comparisons around that, or?
It's way out of 1.25% as a percentage of our rates, rateable income. Perhaps our council and Far North are the ones that have the highest, the write-offs. Thereafter, there would be a minor amounts, but definitely between us two councils have the similar portions.
Yeah, and then just following up on page 37. So when we're talking about collection methods, other, so we're saying, actively working to recover debt, and this is a genuine question. So if we're not involved in third-party collection and payment plans, what does that involve?
So one of the things was, and Fiona can actually say the others, in terms of our ability to collect rates and the coercive powers of the Rating Act is the mortgagee sales. So for argument's sake, at the end of the financial year, what are the rates outstanding on some of those that have loans? We have to notify the bank. As a process that occurs in there, we notify them and have done in the previous years, and they say this is the amount outstanding, and it's usually deducted and added to their overall loan bill. We have chosen not to do that this year, and it is a review and a process of how we can actually do it in other ways, working with the rather than using the complete coercive powers on there.
So that has been excluded from the mortgagee process and included in other.
Yes.
Okay, I had Councillor Seymour and then Councillor Faulkner.
Because my recall was it was never 770 as much as that. I think that is quite high. So concerned. But I understand that you do a huge amount of work before you get to that point. I just wanted to look at, it's page 38. Is that solid waste account, how, has it been, it's overdue for 90 days. That seems to be a reasonable amount of time and quite a large sum of money. Are we expecting to be able to get that back? Page 38 of 54.
I would just have to double check of what that was and come back to you. I remember when I was writing the report, I went through all of them, but at the top of my head, I can't. But we can get you that information of what it is. But we are actively just find out what is making that up, and I can actually identify what's outstanding.
Well, and thank you very much. And while you're at it, maybe then the resource consents overdue 90 days, because my understanding is people can't access their resource consent till they pay for it. So have we come in, that's a reason, 79,000, virtually $80,000 worth of resource consents. The work is being done and someone's chosen not to pick them up.
That is in dispute. Of
The
a particular
money is in dispute, or the consent's in dispute?
in dispute.
Which?
It is the actual, the quantum of money is in dispute for the charges of those costs with it. Yeah.
Supplementary through you, Madam Chair, is it one consent or?
One.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. I'd be interested to know how someone or what organisation owes us 134,000 under solid waste. Thank you.
I was talking, I got them mixed up. Resource consents was one, the one that was outstanding, but I'll come back with
I'll
that.
get you on that.
But the 134 might be more than one.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's still 90 days overdue.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, those were the two questions that popped up. My only supplementary one to that, which would be of interest, would be the science amount due 90 days as well. It seems like that may be one as well, or yeah. So yeah, just as we could. Thank you so much.
Any other questions?
Look at the pie chart there, general land versus Maryland, the figures are staggering, 6.4 million predicted for 2021. I don't think people quite realise this is going to be further exacerbated in terms of the legislation that's just been passed. When you consider the contiguous land issues, and there are hundreds and thousands of those blocks that attract the uniform general charge, we will no longer be able to collect. This figure will balloon.
But Councillor Petit, my understanding is with the new legislation, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this will give our CEO the ability to write off.
Yes.
So I hear what you're saying about contiguous properties, but that will address our ongoing issue where we write for land which nothing can be done with it. So I see it being advantageous.
Oh, I haven't argued about that. I've said it would be advantageous and probably we'll be able to get rid of half of this debt, but it still is going to exacerbate the problem in terms of the new legislation which comes into effect in July. Contiguous properties, we will no longer be able to get the uniform general charge. That's what I mean.
So you're saying for contiguous properties, we will not be charging
That's
the
what the
UAGC.
legislation is about.
But this, to me, we are charging a rate which we cannot collect anyway. So this is more like a paper exercise nearly, because we know. So at least then we won't be able to charge that and we won't collect it. So it's a plus minus.
I understand that. But I mean, every year I've been in council, this problem's got worse. And I've asked the question in the past, are we doing this right? I know staff, it's a difficult task for staff. But I question it. Surely there must be another method we can look at a system.
Can I ask a question, just because I'm interested in read what those new legislation was? Are we not just applying national direction laws that are set in relation to Māori owned land? It is not us We have our own policy, but it's consistent with what is expected of us nationally. Is my assumption correct?
Yes, it is, but we have also more than just what the legislation allows. So we're trying to apply that in addition to what is required by legislation to reduce the overall impacts. This is part of the next parts when we are looking at things, is our emission policies. How does that line with the new changes to legislation? How does that look for what does our strategy looks like in the future? So that is definitely part of an ongoing work that we need to look at and address.
And we did commit to a workshop, if I remember in saying that Councillor Bill need to give some input as well, because he gets all that information from his group.
It's an ear bashing.
Don't do an ear bashing, Bill. No ear bashing is allowed. Okay, Councillor Seymour.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a question around the other, which is on the spreadsheet. I don't need the answer just now, 37 of 54. Obviously, I think I just heard Ms. Foreman suggest that instead of doing mortgagee sales, you're looking at some other way. But it's 23% of even the general land, and I presume that's 23% of 2.7 million. I just think that whatever we choose to do in there surely is a policy decision. So can we please have, once you've sorted that out, can we have that reported back to council as to how that unpaid rates and that option? Because at the end of the day, we have this chunk of compliant ratepayers and this chunk of people who have difficulties at any one time. But the rates are struck and they have to be paid, or otherwise council can't deliver on its activities. So, but if there's to be a change in how you pursue unpaid rates, certainly on general title land, I think council boards should be advised. So can you please share what that plan is? And can that please be put on bring up in our agenda? Thank you. I mean, it's a third of the 64 million. And it's a quarter of the 2.7 million, 6.4, not 6.
Thank you. Councillor Akwata-Brown, you're next.
Didn't jump in quick enough after Bill's kōrero to Māori freehold land. I know that there's been significant work, the team have been working in this space, and as we've noted, the legislation changed governments, the Te Whenua land. But I just wanted to ask, during our submissions, we had a trust make a submission, and I'm wanting to know when a trust, a Māori trust, comes in and makes submissions about projects and future kind of considerations to planting and growing crops and whatnot on Māori land. Does that alleviate or give into the rate space issue we have with Māori land? Like, I'm just trying to figure out the relationship we have when we do have a set trust that's interested in building, creating a industry on their land. If we see more of that, is that our relationship with them as council is going to help alleviate the issue we have with rateable land, Māori land? That relationship, I just was thinking about just as we're talking, when we had the submissions, one of the trusts was talking about some work up the coast that they're looking into. Is that work going to help? So they might inspire others too, et cetera, et cetera.
I'll just briefly, I think Fiona's also got something, but basically your rates for emissions, where we're looking at to review and see is it for unintended consequences and things that we wish to develop, and that is what we want to improve. And so that's how do we actually take that further in some of the emissions that what we've got, but how do we actually allow that, what opens it wider for those kind of discussions that we have to encourage things to develop land that couldn't have been before. But I think, Fiona, you wanted to raise something.
Sorry. With trust, if you've got a trust on Māori land, they have to pay rates to the extent of money that's generated from the land. So if there's no money generated from the land, then they don't have to pay the rates. With these properties that we'll be developing, is like Pauline said, this will come up when we look at the emissions to help with how we can encourage development. And then after that, once they come into production, yes, there would be some return off the land, and we would expect that there would be rates being paid. So yes, it generates the economy, and it means that there would be rates being paid for those blocks.
I guess I'm interested to know, how do we, within discussions and talks regards to Māori owned land and, with new considerations, how our relationship is, like we've got our Māori leadership, our group, etc. Because council's got a role to play in this space, but how do we make sure we're doing it, I guess, very transparent to all those who have concerns when, trusts go off and look into feasibility studies, etc., etc. So I'm just wanting it to not look like, I suppose I'm trying to say, council seeing the benefit of that purely and simply for rates, respect, and the concerns of community, just those relationships. But yeah, you've answered my question. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Quick question. What date are the rates struck? What is the date each year? Sorry? That's first July. Thank you.
Any more questions in regards to this paper? Do I have a mover, Coral? No. Councillor Akawata Brown is the mover and a seconder by Councillor Robinson. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you for that. Thank you, Pauline. Okay, we move to page 39. 39 is our financial report.
Through the chair, just so basically it's just for the first 9 months. Operation wise, we seem to be tracking to plan. Some of the things where this annual plan, if you remember when it was adopted just after lockdown, and we had a reset of rates collected. It was looking at just under 4.98, and we said it was 3.26. But in addition to that, we also said there was a stimulation from the capital investment program. And having reviewed this, there is still some to go, and where we are at 9 months, and then where we know that there's some of the carryovers. And actually having a look at, was it and have we succeeded in what we said we were going to be doing in that capital investment stage. And reviewing back since 2009, when we did the wastewater treatment plant, that first initial stage, that was a significant capital investment there. Full year results of capital expenditure, this is the highest for 9 months, meaning we've got 55.5 million. The next closest for full year results of capital expenditure was last year at 47.4 million. So it is a significant amount, and some of that meant that in order to do the quantum that we needed to do, that some of the work had to be prioritised in a different manner. And so we know with the roading, there was a time-sensitive requirements where the major contracts had to be completed by the 30th of June, and some of the renewals then had to be phased in the remaining parts of the year. The one other one that sort of falls into that line, and as you can see within the things that it doesn't tell the true story, is with stormwater. Stormwater, the full capital projects is around about 3.4 million for the capital projects. The major project associated with that was for the Rickney Road, and that has been prioritised first because that was considered an upgrade. So the renewal programs for the rest of the things is a smaller bucket of about 1.2 of about 5 or 6 projects, and they're phased to occur to make sure that the work for the more complex project was completed first. But definitely there has been significant capital investment that has occurred for this period, but also when you compare to all the other achievements. Pre-2019, the average for this period of time was about 17 million. So it is quite a significant change.
Okay, floor is open. Any questions or queries in regards to our financial reports? Councillor Worsnop.
I guess my comment was just around the time lag between, and I think it comes a little bit to the conversation around meeting timings, etc. But presuming that stormwater hadn't had that big, amount of work happen, obviously over the last little while, we would actually just be too late to offer any, real contribution to how we were tracking, just because that report was really probably, February data, as opposed to, we're now almost in June. So just whether you had a comment on whether the timing can be improved so that we potentially, if there's a need for the table to actually have input somehow, whether it's more timely.
Yes, probably this year is a little bit of an exception. Normally we would have the financial updates in between the reports that you have. This is the quarterly, which is more in depth, and then you have in between it, it's just be perhaps with the LTP hearings and some of the committee meetings hasn't been as frequent. And bear in mind that the 20th or the working day, you still have only just got April's information that are there. But there is, hopefully you can get more up-to-date information with those other reports that are in between. So you have as you go. And if there's other ways that we can give you more informal updates, there's another ways of doing that as well too. So that, whatever.
Councillor Robinson then.
Thanks. On page 49, and I'm pretty sure I'm on the same report still. I don't think I've jumped ahead. The parking corridor there, when is this due for review, our parking policy?
Who is in charge of that? Who is our parking policy?
Yeah,
Come back to
we'll
us.
come back
Thank
to you with the review date.
Yeah, I just see, like, we're budgeting to spend $49,000 for new parking meters. It sort of really prompts me to think we should revisit the whole concept of parking meters, and particularly in light of post-COVID regime we brought in, and just really look at this afresh. And I'd like to do that sooner rather than later, if we're going to be committing quite significant chunks of money to replacing the status quo. Second question related to the next paragraph, water and coastal resources for drilling. This might be your division, Mr. Wilson. Has the drilling that's been done to date up at Uawa been undertaken with potential supply in mind, which I probably assume is a no? And what is obviously we're drilling on people's land, and what happens to the bores afterwards? Does that stay with the landowner? Is there some benefit accruing from that? Is there some cost recovery potential there if someone's going to then end up with a bore, or those bores just sealed off and it's a sunk cost literally once the project's been undertaken or completed, sorry.
So through you, Madam Chair, that sits with me and the science team. So yes, the bores have been drilled on private land. 2 of the bores have been turned into permanent monitoring bores, so they are purely for monitoring the groundwater resource, not for water supply. The other bores have been sealed and capped.
And there are more bores to be drilled still as part of this program?
Yes, there are. So we have ceased works at the moment while we're obtaining a resource consent to drill on different areas. The number that we drill sort of depends what we find, because that's the whole point of the drilling process, is to investigate the resource. We go to what we think is a likely area, and if we don't find anything, then that bore is capped, and then we move on to somewhere else. So ideally we'll end up with 2 or 3 more monitoring bores, but we just don't know what we're going to find.
And is there any chance any of those can be commercialised if they have water on the private land?
I am not an expert on the technicalities. I don't believe they're of sufficient size, but we can come back to you with more information on that.
Just so long as we're looking for opportunities to make some more money.
Thank you for that. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions. The first one's around the wastewater procurement.
What page?
48, and it's number 1. It's the 3rd paragraph. And I'm not too worried about the individual dollars, but more depending on the final delivery of early procurement equipment in the context of establishment. Well, establishment's not going to happen yet for a bit, but I thought about a year ago, we did approve early procurement on the basis that it was going to save us money.
Mr. Wilson.
Did that happen?
Through your worship, yes, it has. The goods are sitting in Australia at the moment. They've been boxed up, they're in transit, they'll be coming through. So we have got those, we'll be taking delivery of them as soon as we get them from shipping. So we have bought about $4 million worth of plants so far we've paid. So we've paid substantial deposits on a lot of the things for them to be, but they're all in train.
And then supplementary, when will we have a new update on that project? Because we haven't actually had an update for quite a while.
Through your worship, there's an update going to the Wastewater Management Committee around where we are tracking with the contract and for the build to date. So we're in the very, very final stages of legal review of the contract with that contractor.
Thank you. My next question is around is item 6 on the explanation for item 6 on 49. And it just talks about work plan to commence in March through to June. Is that happening now or is that next March?
Through your worship, that is the revetment wall. So we have been and appointed the contract for that. So we're waiting for these swells to go down. The contractor was due to mobilise this week on site. So Burgess Contracting have the contract to do that. And that has the carryover funding from Tauwharanui as well as part of the revetment wall works that are going to be happening.
So it was never going to happen in March.
Through your worship, we've been waiting so the project has, in the way that we put it, it has commenced, the designs are done, we're just waiting for the starting date. We've been working with the contractor since March.
Thank you. And my next one's probably for Mr. Wilson through you, Madam Chair, is 8 in the solid waste around Kokahu.
Page 49.
Still on 49, item 8 on the same page, because we've been talking about remediation and what we needed to do with respect to Kokahu for years. So can I understand what the timeframes are and what's going to happen?
Through your worship, we've been waiting for the Paukahu Trust to come back with some meeting times. We have met informally with some of the new members, updating them on where we're at and the process going forward. So we're waiting for a meeting with them still. We have been doing some of the monitoring and some of the procurement for the contaminated sites expertise that we will need as part of that while we wait for Paukahu.
Thank you. And the last one on that page is number 9, and it relates to the cross purchase across over 2 years of the boat for the harbour master. Do we know how much it cost in total? Because if we put 117 into last year, what are we going to be putting into this year? How much of the boat and its fit out actually cost, please?
So it says that the final cost is expected to be 117K. So why we said that we allowed...
The final unbudgeted cost. So does that the boat and fit out cost 317K?
No, you gave approval for a maximum of 200K. That was not in the budget as such, but you gave council approval for that, and it's saying that the final cost is 117.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Madam Chair. That's it.
Councillor Gregory.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask on page 50 of 54, number 16, conveniences. A few months ago, we made that decision about the Peel Street toilets, and I've had a few people asking what is happening with that. Nothing?
Someone update us on what's happening at Peel Street. They have to come back. Thank you. So it's, we'll get that information. Thank you for that, Councillor Gregory.
It'll just say that it is in for provision for next year's LTP as part of the changes and the carryovers. So if it's not completed this year, they're estimating that it will be completed next year.
Councillor
Entry to
Cranston.
that. Can you also, when they come back, give some indication of whether there has been a price fix for that budgeting or whether that's likely to be quite liquid?
Any other questions? Councillor Worsnop.
Yeah, I was just wondering if it's possible for the graph on page 52 to be shown against a background of maybe a 5-year running average or something, just because the context when we have things like the PGF gets lost when we're just looking at this year's, our budgeted year relative to, our actual year compared to last year, when last year had, some not typical investment in and of itself. And for those of us who probably haven't been here for that long, it would be helpful just to know, where our current year spend in our budgets are relative to what the long run average is, even if it's a moving average, just for context.
For Chair, that's probably a good idea. Probably a good idea to actually do a 3 years for an LTP. So when we go into the new one, we track that, and you can actually see those, and then we can perhaps give a historical basis of those other things. But then going forward, because the unfortunate thing is that we're dealing in financial years is not necessarily the timing of when a project is a year. Yeah, and so by giving it over a rolling financial year, 3 years for the new LTP, that makes sense.
Councillor Akuhata-Brown.
I'm interested to ask, do we, when we had a devastating incident, destruction of council property like we had with the cemetery, paying for that in respect to destruction of any council properties, do we get good on that? I mean, respect to sometimes it's an accident of offence or whatever, but that was quite devastating to what happened in the cemetery. So costings wise, were people charged to pay for them?
There's probably two parts of it. Our insurance policy won't, the actual headstones, I'm trying to think of the word, the headstones and the things like that, that is private ownership on council land, and unfortunately our insurance won't cover those kind of policies. The next part of that is is there reparation that comes through the court process, and do we get some of those, and that has to come out, that would be pursued, or what are they fined or whatever, but that's secondary to out of our control. But yes.
I guess I wanted to ask, do we have like we're not losing money through, like vandalism and all that type of thing. Do we have a pocket that kind of sits in that we're hoping for costs to be paid back through bad court recovery or whatever? But how well are we doing in that space? Because I mean, I've only noticed a little bit of graffiti around the space, but do we have much loss to council in regards to vandals and breaking of any council property stuff?
We have only a minimal, we put a minimal provision in there for graffiti, but it is less than about $9,000, I believe. So we don't provision higher for things that could be a possible event. We do it for a minimum amount for those kind of things.
If I can just add to that through your worship, the graffiti vandalism is it's an everyday issue that we have to deal with. You've seen public toilets and what happens there, and unfortunately insurance isn't enough to cover when the claims would be quite low. It's not, we can't go after that. Similarly with gardens and trees that get pulled up. So it's an everyday thing that ratepayers end up having to pay for.
And also an example, just down my road, someone burnt a car a while back. And what has happened in the last little while, the tar seal has been starting to lift, and there's a massive pothole that council filled in the last while, but no one's going to be charged for that. It will just go, we will all pay for it. So stuff like that happen around the region all the time, and it's really unfortunate because everyone then need to pick up the bill. You have to. Anywho, any more questions in regards to this report? Thank you for a very thorough report. I really like that there are thorough notes at the end to let us know why there are timing differences or what the outliers are. Moved by Councillor Wharehinga, seconded by Councillor Hughes. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Am I missing something? No, I am at the end. Yes, I am at the end. I declare this meeting closed. Do I have a public excluded for this meeting? No, I've got so many notes. closed. We'll have a coffee. We'll come back 10:15 for our extraordinary meeting. Thank you, Pauline. Thanks, everyone. stuff. But for now, okay, let me just get myself sorted. Everyone has got the paperwork, so I welcome everyone to our extraordinary council meeting. It's 10:15. So what we have today are two papers in front of us. So the first paper is a paper with a notice of motion. So that is report 21126. And then we have a response to the notion from Pauline. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open the floor. First, apologies, it's the same, Councillor Dowsing. Declarations of interest, leave of absence, acknowledgement and tributes, public input and petitions, extraordinary business. That is page 3, so that is the report we'll be looking at today. So I'm going to open the floor to Nadine and Pauline to talk about this. Then don't worry, everyone will have the opportunity to have their say. I suspend the standing orders. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wharehenga, all in favour, contrary, carried. So I am going to just hand over here and then I'll open the floor. We'll have a discussion and move through this. Thank you.
Thank you. Morena koutou, through your worship. So just want to firstly respond to some of the comments yesterday just in relation to this. Our job as staff is to provide you with advice. Your role is to make those decisions. You might not like the advice that is given, but we give our professional advice. And so what you've got in front of you today is our professional advice around how we think should the notice of motion, should the resolution succeed, how it will impact, how we know it will impact on the long-term plan. That's your decision entirely. It is not ours. We're just providing you with the facts. And so in doing so, we want you to just be aware of those consequences. The other part I ask is that one major risk for us is in terms of if there's further workshops required, we are now where the rubber hits the road, and what we don't want to do is be jeopardising our ability to strike the rate come 1 July, which would happen if we continue to start playing with the fundamentals of your revenue and finance policy. So I ask that in terms of your decision making today, that you take that into consideration. We have never ever been in a situation, and I was just counting 5 long-term plans, where we've had to delay striking of the rate. So bear that as in mind as you have your deliberations today. Anything you want to add?
Just with that, is there anything that is fundamentally different that the community is seeing? And there's a different way of doing it. We cannot get it done before the setting of the rates. That is a fundamental, another process. You have to have another special consultative procedure, and it is almost because you cannot, it has to be adopted as such within your long-term plan. So just being aware that any fundamental changes from what has been consulted in the two things will require a longer period to work through.
Thank you for that. Okay, I'm opening the floor. Councillor Akuhata-Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, C and Pauline, for your considerations to this. And absolutely, we take on, well, I personally take on staff's advice based on a number of things I need more learning on. But I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. The Three Waters reform space, is that going to have any impact in our region in respect to the concerns raised by submitters? Do we know enough about that particular consideration legislative wise? I mean, I get that we've had a number of submitters submitting against this. What percentage of the population submitted in respect? But firstly, will the Three Waters reform have any impact in regards to this space?
Through your worship, potentially. So we will know, I understand, in the next couple of weeks where that's going to land. My understanding is it's still optional to opt in, but it will make it will be very difficult for those councils that choose to sit outside an amalgamated system. So if the three waters went into a larger water provider, the council wouldn't necessarily have a say as to how people will pay or what they will pay, how much.
But yeah, so we are seeing that dialogue is happening quite intensely around. I know in certain forums I'm in, we are talking more and more about that reform space. So we're still watching and waiting and wondering. Okay, my kind of 3 points I wanted to speak to, Madam Chair. I always get nervous when we kind of renegade or discuss a rural-urban, because I'm always thinking about us as one region, one consideration for all, one ring to rule them all. So that's where my concerns sit with when we look at a user pay system, because we all benefit. There's that whole beneficiaries to the immediate, but also the benefits to all that are always there. So that's where my concern lies, is I don't want to see a division in respect to a rural-urban, because that has been around this table and we've done better, I believe, in the years in this space to do better, to make sure people understand our whole region's needs and how we work interdependently. And the points raised by those have noted the number of submitters, and I did want to know how many. In regards to a democracy and respect to concerns raised, what percentage of our population does this speak to? And I suppose that's in line with my divisive concerns and user pays. Those were the 3 kind of points I had concerns in respect to this this paper before us right now.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in terms of, I would compare it to the rateable base, because other people are paying as opposed to the per population, and I think it's probably a fairer indication rather than saying 50,000 people. So we have 22,500 rateable base. In the first special consultative procedure where we went out to the community, there were 111 submitters of the 22,500. And then in the subsequent one where we also consulted throughout the long-term plan, there were 12 submission points raised on this.
Thank you. Councillor Faulkner.
Thank you, Your Worship. With all due respect, I don't believe that this is a rural-urban conversation. This is about a pay and then pay again conversation. So in the same way, and this is what I just wanted to clarify, and the reason why I have consistently voted against this, is the fact that the users of the reticulated water system and the wastewater plant are not expected, therefore, and you can always argue that the urban ratepayer helps pay for roads. But if you take that same line of reasoning, then that same urban ratepayer would need to own their own grader and a man to drive it, because at the end of the day, we are being expected to pay for our own rainwater tanks, our septic systems, the cleaning and disposal thereof, and again, help pay on an urban basis. So I struggle with this belief that it is somehow urban versus rural. It's actually pay and then pay again. Stormwater, on the other hand, impacts on our environment. And when I say environment, I mean everyone. And when I have stood up in community meetings and defended the need for all of our communities to help pay for things that benefit all of us, that is what I'm talking about. So stormwater very firmly falls into that space, but it's pay and pay again. That's what we're arguing against.
Thank you for that. Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question to Ms. Foreman with respect to the paper she sent to us last night, and we've got it on here this morning. And on page 3 of 7, where council work officers have done some work on and suggested the impact that a change might have. And dare I say, it's a new change. It wasn't in place. So it's the introduction of something new. I totally agree with Councillor Faulkner's comments, and it is pay 100% for your own service and pay again. I think that's a very good analogy. But could someone explain to me how the high value properties, which one might have assumed would be paying a little more, that their rates will decrease by 55%. That just doesn't seem to make sense.
$55.
$55. Well, it doesn't matter whether, yeah, I mean, how does that happen? If we put, all we're doing is reverting to what the process is now, let's get that clear, recognising, like Councillor Faulkner, I and others have voted against it consistently, recognise that it's recorded in the minutes of the last meeting that we approved this morning, angry responses to proposed 10% surcharge. Recognise also that one council officer came on behalf of the whole community, so would probably be counted as one submitter in the pre-engagement. There has been continuous concern expressed about this charge. So can you please explain how you've arrived at those new figures at the bottom of page 3?
Thank you, Pauline.
So what happens is two steps that's occurs here. The actual reticulated services then goes from 90% to 100%, and because it's a fixed charge, it goes that those people that are reticulated to it, the base rate will be at least $55 more. So we understand it's $55. But when the capital value comes off of the general portion, those that have got higher capital value, say for argument's sake a $1.4 million property or thereabouts within the city, their reduction because of that portion means that they pay less than the $55. What they were paying before as that contribution to it was around about $110, $120. When you take that off, because it's not on the capital value, it's on a fix, then they pay less what we said in the draft. So this is saying this is the impacts of the changes from where we were in the draft. So that's the difference.
I'm sorry, I'm not that dumb, but I just can't follow that. I mean, this is a provision of a service, and that was I'd love a whiteboard where you put it up on a whiteboard that actually showed how you can explain that it will cost 155 more, but once you apply it to the capital value, it'll suddenly cost less. Nothing, in fact.
So the simple way of just saying capital value they were on the general rate for that wastewater was $119. Now they're going to get charged $54. The difference is that they are less than $55. That's the difference.
Well, they need to be, if they're going to get decreased by $55, and you're saying they would have paid $104, they have to be being reduced by $165.
Yeah, depending on what the capital values are.
So why is the capital value involved? Why is it not? I mean, it should be a multiplier based on the capital value, surely.
That's the general rate.
Yes.
So therefore, that's out, eliminated, and all you've got now, that's taken away. You deduct that away. It's not in there. It was in the draft. Yep. Now it's not in there, so it's a zero line, yes. And therefore you only got a $55. So it's the difference between the option here and there that is the decrease, because it's no longer in that amount. It's a variance.
Do we understand that?
Yes. Yeah.
I still can't, yes, I can see that. I still can't see how a decision that's been taken to shift 10% of the cost of water and drinking water into the general rate will have that impact. And I doubt that the public will understand it either. Regardless, I still think that we aren't listening to our community by putting that charge onto those who have to provide 100% of the service for themselves.
Thank you. Who's going to go next? Larry and then Bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I know the whole thing is the resistance is principle based. I know the principle is not right, but the rationale of what we're doing and why we're doing it is actually pretty obvious. When you look at what the consequences are going to be to reverting back, because remember we've gone to pan charges as well, which is totally from our original rating way we did it out of it, hasn't it? You know, so that's a whole new introduction. So, you know, if we think now the consequences of not going with the 10% on the general rate, 1.2K extra for schools, $43 more for the lower residential, you know, medium 3, you know, it's the impact is going to be huge on the people that we're trying to protect. In particular, you know, the hospitals are going to be more impacted, the retirement villages and schools. So, you know, we've just, the the rationale of why we did this was pretty obvious at the time. I know the principle is not probably right, but this is a rating system is not the it's not the ultimate and clear tool that that we would like it to be. So unfortunately, we've got to work with what we've got, and I'm happy to go back and stick with what our original decision was. So,
Thank you for that. Councillor Burdick, you are next. Just remember your microphone. I thought you put your hand up.
Talk to you later. No, I just, anyway.
You don't have to. We can, if you want to talk later, that's all good.
No,
All good.
while I'm here and you're addressing me, Madam Chair, Nadine, and all of us, we have a duty of care to ensure the financial well-being of our ratepayers. And that involves fairness and equity across the board. No favourites. I've had a good read of what Pauline said here. Like Pat, it's a bit hard to understand. I better backtrack up. I left the meeting the other day, and in that 2-hour drive, I reflected. Normally, it's on the good decisions we make, and the ones that are not so good, and the bad decisions. And the whole time I have been in council, this is the worst decision this council has made. So I rang Pat and said, we've got to try and do something about this. And that's where I sit. It still comes back to fairness and equity in terms of how we look after our district. Rihet is our elected mayor, Nadine is our sole employee, and ourselves. That is where we are. We have a duty of care to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen. I'm not interested in the semantics, just the fairness that we should apply, common sense across the board in terms of our rating system. And this is unfair. You've all admitted it around the table. And yet our vote gets split, and it'll get split again this time. I don't know where we are. I think, like most of us, we've got common sense. We value where we are and our community and what we do by way of council work. I'll leave it at that because I came here determined today not to lose it.
Thank you for not losing that. Microphone. Next. You need to warn us before you take any pictures, please. Nearly blinded me.
That the council approves the recommendation that is there with 6 signatures attached to keep the process moving. So I'm happy to move approve the revenue and finance policy with one change. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson.
Through your worship, can CEO or Ms. Foreman clarify when a city connected person pays their percentage of the water or wastewater, are they paying for the cost of the water coming to them alone and the cost of their wastewater going out? Or does that cost include a percentage of the network, the depreciation, the replacement, the maintenance, the system? Right. Multiple parts to my question.
Full cost of that reticulated service. And it also includes that if there is any provision, say, or Wainaki to do improvements or biodiversity, it includes all of that. For any other incremental other increases, it includes the full cost.
So when looking at and thinking about the pay and pay again scenario, a person on the reticulated system is in fact paying again and again and again for the system that exists that they are connected to, correct? Councillor Burdett spoke about fairness and equity. And now, we have in this space, in this forum, spoken about this particular take many times, And we have spoken at length about a network approach to this whole issue, that people in the city, through their rates, in fact, are subsidising or paying for roads outside of the city, for flood protection, for dog control, for all sorts of things. Because in fact, we are one region. We're a regional council, and we are in fact a very small and tight, we are a tight region. People from outside of the city, they come and visit the city, they use services in the city, they attend businesses in the city. This city exists and functions because it has a functioning wastewater network, a functioning water network, and a functioning stormwater network. Well, most of the time anyway, but it has the infrastructure in place. And if you want to talk about fairness and equity, everybody outside of those who pay for it in the city benefit in some way. There is a greater good that everyone shares in, because of the system that is currently paid exclusively by those in the city. That is fairness and equity in actual practice. I don't have a problem with what we initially agreed upon. Our LTP will see us putting in supplies for water in Ruatoria, Tokomaru. There is going to be ongoing benefits beyond the status quo right now for various communities outside of the city. And this is certainly not the worst decision this council has made. I could name a few more. And so for those reasons, the rationale that we applied and agreed upon, yes, the principle may be a bit unpalatable for some people, but the rationale is a very solid rationale. And I have not seen anything which challenges that rationale. So for me, that rationale still stands, and I stand by and support our original decision and would vote against this motion.
Thank you. No, anyway, so I will give opportunity for people that, Kerry, that have not spoken yet, and then I might. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to highlight the fact that every single speaker so far has agreed that the principle's wrong. It's interesting because I think it's our first line that says this is a principled approach. So
Stringing along, Bo.
No, that's not what you said. I listened to what you said. Given that the whole premise of the way we set rates is a principled approach, and the problem that that all of us have who dispute this approach is with the principle, not with the concept of sharing the burden. It's the principle and the way that we're doing it. The rationale behind it has been roads. And right from the outset, I've said, if you want more money for roads, take more money from the people who use the roads for roads. Don't muddy the waters by going essentially in reverse of a principled approach and just blurring the lines into everything that can be quite easily targeted. It's not possible to draw a close correlation between roading and water, because you cannot discriminate between who is connected to a road. You can draw probably a pretty similar analogy between roads and refuse centres, for example, because you can't say anyone in the district can use a refuse centre. We don't discriminate between who can use a library, and no one in the rural sector has ever said we don't want to contribute to your libraries, we don't want to contribute to theatres because we don't live in there. No one says that. Everyone is happy to contribute to that because they don't have a library at home, they don't have a theatre at home. They do have water systems at home that not only do they have to pay to replace, but quite often they have to pay to replenish. And the level of service, the difference between what you get in the city and what you get in the country is worth a lot. If I said to you, it's going to cost you $500 a year for the privilege of being able to flush your toilet and turn on your tap without ever having to think about it, there's quite a few people in the country who would actually jump at that opportunity. They don't have that choice. It's unbelievable, I think, that this report says that there were only 12 submissions against this. On pages 206, 207 and 208, there are 28 alone. Unfortunately, they just put it under the stormwater pipe or water pipes category, which means that unfortunately that hasn't been counted as having a submission, even though what they've said and articulated very clearly is that they don't support paying for a service that they don't receive. They're not saying they're not prepared to muck in and help our community do better. They're not saying that. They're saying the principle is wrong. And if we're going to pay for something, we want to get the benefit of that. I'm not sure if this table understands that by opening up this door, you're going to get expectations in the rural community. We contribute to, you heard it from Te Raunga o Ngāti Porou. We're going to contribute to this. We want tank water. We want to be able to disperse our septic systems without a charge. You create an expectation when you're part of that team. Are you prepared to meet that? Because the costs in that rural sector are massive. They're currently being borne by private individuals. And if you want to share that load, by all means, come join the party. But good God, be prepared for the kind of costs that we will be sharing. At the moment, they're not part of that. They're not part of anything that we see beyond something that allows somebody to fill up a 1,000 litre tank in Rotoria, which I don't know about you, but filling up my water 1,000 litres at a time doesn't sound that fun. So I come back to the principle we have had, and I completely take our executive's point, we have had a long time to get this right. I have been bashing my head against a brick wall for 6 months around this topic, and I'm like Bill, I think that we have quite badly got it wrong. When you look at the impact here that is shown, that if we take this off, this is the impact, and therefore we need to spread it more widely, that's a flawed presumption. The reason for redistributing the PAN charges was to fairly reflect every user and how much they used it. And then we're using a completely different approach for justifying why somebody outside the city should use it. The reason that we don't apportion the targeted rates in the city based on capital value is because this table determined that capital value was not a good measure to determine who should pay more within the city. So why does it make sense to do it outside of the city? Through and through and through, the principles in this are wrong. I don't dispute we've got ourselves in one hell of a mess trying to fix it at this late stage. But this is why it's really important to do your homework early on, understand the decisions you're making. Because we've gotten to this position because we didn't take a close enough look at the decisions that we were making early on. It bugs the hell out of me that we're able to come up with this information that says at this late stage what a difference removing this rate would make, but we were unable to come up with the information that shows the recent changes in the LTP, what influence they will have on these ratepayers that are already bearing more outside of the urban areas. That's all from me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone wants to have a go? Yes.
Just a question. Did staff want to respond to the capital value stuff that Councillor Woodstock brought up?
Pauline.
Specifically, which capital, you mean why you decided to apply?
Okay, I'm going to have a go. Anyone else wants to go before I wrap it up? Yes. Ask your clarification question.
And again, I appreciate all those around the table that have insights into the framework that this is, and yeah, it's a big decision, not taken lightly by any means. The pay and pay discussion that Councillor Faulkner mentions, I mean, it's true, like in respect to paying to put in, it's a massive cost. So are we missing something in the space of discussioning that for those costs, those huge costs to those who have to put in water tanks, have to maintain them, continue to, in that space, are we missing, the costings in respect to those people having to pay for their own septic systems and all tank systems with water and every framework? I mean, and again, it's on me as a councillor to do my homework. So I'm just wanting to ask, the pay and pay again, is there a legitimate thing urban payers pay and pay again for, you know, in the equality space, in the equal and fair distribution of what we pay for? Because I don't want it to sound like an urban rural divide. I certainly think we're not there. Sometimes it feels like that though. So in the pay and pay space, is there some way we can qualify, you know, as urban livers to what we pay for and pay again for, to that discussion? Because I just feel like there is something missing. Are we going about this the wrong way? With respect to the principled approach, we've missed something, and now we've come with this paper, as others have indicated, saying things that we're kind of going, oh really, that's quite an impacting, that's huge, that's a big deal. And I'm feeling in support for my peers who feel this isn't right. But I'm still struggling because of our decision we made was based on the information we had at the time, respect to you. So is there something we're missing? And in regards to pay and pay, is there an equitable, do we feel this is fair and equitable based on urban people believing we pay for all things we use, etc., or don't use? I don't use some of the services I pay for. So in the equality, equal space of fairness and distribution, have we not got that right? Is that why this is before us today? Do we not debate it enough? I'm not sure. Just equal pay space is what I'm asking about. Pay and pay.
Very worship. I think it goes back to a series of workshops that you had, the approach you took, the advice we gave, and different options for you. Principally, this is a political decision to make. The one thing that you need to be aware of is that this will then have flow-on effects to the other revenue and finance policy funding streams, because you are therefore going to be choosing how to apply this rate based on a principle that we will then have to look at the other areas based on that principle. So, so yeah, I think this is a result of a number of steps that you've taken. You've also consulted on that last year on that draft, and there have been some elected members that don't agree and have continued to push that, and now you're debating it again, and that's entirely your prerogative to do so where you land. It's just in terms of next steps, wherever this lands, we will have to readjust ourselves.
And that's not a bad thing though, is it, Madam Chair, in respect to reviewing our process to equity and fairness and distribution? So as much as it's frustrating, or it can cause, I guess, we're going over stuff in respect to it, but is that sometimes what we need to do to get to the best decision outright? Because I think we did try our best, we did the workshops, we did do all that. So I'm, you know, I do hear what my fellow colleagues are saying, but I feel like, well, why is this seen from Councillor Burdett the worst decision, when I don't feel like that it is, based on all the information we got?
I think, through your worship, respectfully, this is a political decision that you either stand by when you made the initial decision, or you agree with the other elected members in terms of the approach wasn't quite right where you needed it to be. So it's entirely up to you all to decide, and then back your decision, knowing what the consequences are from the advice that we have provided you, and recognising what potential unintended consequences there are if we need to unpick the revenue and finance policy and apply a consistent lens across every funding stream.
Councillor Wharehenga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. It's difficult to have a conversation about this without it becoming a rural-urban kind of combo. It does end up being that, because there'll be arguments, valid arguments made on behalf of our rural community, and then also valid arguments made against those arguments that are rural community based. So it does actually, even though the intention is not there for it to be a rural urban conversation, it does kind of turn into that. And for someone like myself, who's born and raised here, raised urbanly, but rurally, hard out massively, rurally connected, up to Waipiro via my whānau, my koro's whāmea at Te Karaka, I do see both sides. I do feel like I have a meaningful view of both sides of these coins. I do want to thank my colleagues who actually brought this paper and have forced us to redebate this, because that's what democracy is. That's what we're elected to do. We're elected to make hard stances on behalf of our communities and hard stances and make hard decisions also on behalf of our communities. That's what our community expect of us. And when I think of this paper, I think of that expectations, the expectations of our community. It's a fact that our community, the whole region wide, expect us to clean up that bay. I've heard our community from out at Mangatu, from out at Whatatutu, from as far up as Te Araroa, bring up the fact that there is, for lack of a better word, paru tiko poos going out in our bay. That's been a region-wide issue that has been brought up with us. And for us to say that that isn't the case would be patently false. Our community, region-wide, expect us to do that. The government has expectations on us around providing water to townships. That's in our future. When I look forward in regards to our future, the central government are kind of lining up in regards to this whole Three Waters reform and going, hey, we're expecting this thing to happen kind of regionally. Our urban and rural communities are expecting us to be faster and better in regards to our consenting processes, particularly our resource consenting processes. But we have a lot of stuff that's happening in our rural areas and a lot of future stuff that's also happening in our rural areas. And I see this as a all of us together for the common good kind of issue. I am happy to still stand by the previous decision and the previous principles upon which we based our former decision. It's a hard decision, and that's what we're elected to do, to make hard decisions on behalf of our community. It's also a rod that I'm kind of whacking my own back with. Again, connected up to Waipiro, connected rates-wise out to Te Karaka. So I'm not standing here as a person that just owns a house here. I'm also standing as a person that has interest in my koro's farm out at Te Karaka and has interest in land through my wharehinga hainga whānau up at Waipiro Bay. This will affect my pocket too. Take those things away. We made some decisions based upon principles, and I stand by the former decisions that we made. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay. So I've made some notes as people were speaking, and one thing I want to say about the last year is when we started on this journey, maybe in June, July last year, staff went out of their way. Everyone here is saying we've had several workshops, lots of opportunities to discuss this. And from the beginning, there were different opinions, which is absolutely healthy because we are 14 people with 14 different backgrounds having to bring the voice to the table. So I welcome the fact that we can debate and re-debate, and we will not always agree, but that's fine as well. So I'm a rural ratepayer myself, so I have my own wastewater system and my own water system. So just putting that out there, when we started looking at this, we definitely took the approach like this is part of a network. So when I went out to our communities in March and April, I have had hundreds of discussions in regards to this. And we had good, Councillor Faulkner gave a lovely kōrero at Makori School, how we are all a network and we all use the hospital or our kids go to school, and that is where that principle started off. I do want to address what Councillor Worsnop said. This is not a perfect system. We know that. From lots of rating issues that we have, we know that rating is an absolute blunt tool. It have unintended consequences, and there's no hiding from that. So I just also want to address what Councillor Worsnop said about, and Councillor Faulkner, in regards to Three Waters and the CEO that might be coming our way in a short little while. It is not unrealistic to say that we will all pay for water for our whole region, that the city will be paying for water for everyone, because at the end of the day, the government will look at us as regions and we will probably all ask to chip in. That is just my opinion, but it's not unfair to say that we will probably all be paying. Last, I also wanted to say that we did, I just want to mention that Councillor Dowsing this morning sent an email in regards to the UAGC portion, which we did workshop way back and decided not to go down there. Last, I'm trying to speak. Last, one thing I want to say about our rating policy is when I joined the council 10 years ago, our rating policy was so complex. Over the years, we have split out stuff and quantified every little thing. And what I have learned from my mayor colleagues is that lots of councils are moving to systems where you will get a rates bill that say you pay $7,000, and there are no breaking down. People will be looking at the region and there will just be a divvying up. And I see us going forward, working towards a system where that will be the case, which will be even more blunt, unfortunately, because if they are more detailed, people can see, oh, why is this charged to me? Why am I paying that? But what I'm picking up nationally is that there's definitely a move towards more a blanket rate that will be divvied up in the region. I'm not saying we're going that way, but that's definitely what I'm hearing. So what I'm saying here today, I acknowledge everyone that spoke against and before. I think when we started way back, some people looked at it as a network system, like I have looked at this as a network system. Like we do roads, I know it's not 100% comparable. Transfer stations, where the city pick up 60% of transfer station, and no, not everyone can use that transfer station. It's for people who live 15 kilometres from that transfer station. I think about the township upgrade money that we have also allocated. I think of the $270,000 given to the Uawa Cycleway as well, where I see us working as a regional network in certain areas. It's not perfect, but that is how I look at it. So thank you for that right of reply. Councillor Seymour.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks for those observations, which are all entirely valid, as are a number of other observations that have been made. This is not about urban and rural. It is about those who access a service and those who don't. So it doesn't matter whether you live out at Wainui, where you don't get a water supply, you will be captured by this as well. So it's not about urban rural. It is about a service for which you pay 100% for your own service. The installation of your septic tank, which are now very expensive, pushing close to 30,000. The upgrade of it, the maintenance of it, as has been alluded to by one or two of my colleagues, the cleaning of it, the disposal, etc. The whole 100% cost. We're not talking about things we share. Of course, we share heaps of things across the region. Everybody buys into that, and the wider community buys into it too. It has nothing to do with that. It is absolutely about whether you get a service or whether you provide it 100% for yourself. As for the potential future raised by Mr. Robinson yesterday, that's all in the future, and you will still provide a water tank to put your water in and spouting and keep it clean to collect your water. So it is not going to be a water supply that comes bubbling up at your gate, very likely, and it's only a couple of places, and it's in the future. This is the now. A couple of comments that have just been made by the Mayor are in the future. This is the now. I mean, local government mightn't even be here to sort out the water supply if the government reviews local government. So what our obligation is at the moment is for 2021, 2031, and you'll have an opportunity to change it in 3 years. But I just suggest that we just clear our minds of thinking it's something we all share and be quite clear about the fact that we are, those supporting this notice of motion are supporting it because it needs to be 100% funded by the individual. That is the point. It is not urban rural. And I urge you to vote for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, I've got quite a few papers in front of me, so you will have to bear with me as I put motions. So the first one, we go to this one, the blue one, which have the notice of motion in it. So we have moved and seconded. So Tony, it's this one. Oh, well, only special people got the blue pages. So it is 21126. So it's page 4 of 7. Do you have it? No, we've only moved one. I know that. What I'm saying is if you go to the recommendations on page 4, we've only moved number 1 to suspend the standing orders. So I'm asking of the person who moved this, I don't know who it was, Coral. Yes. Cool. So are you happy, Josh, just to include number 2 as well, that we support? All in favour? Contrary carried. So that is just. So now I take everyone to page 7. So what we have there is the proposal from Councillor Seymour and Councillor Bedette and supported by Faulkner, Worsnop, Dowsing Hughes, that the Council 1A approves the revenue and finance policy with one change. B1, wastewater and drinking water rates be removed from the general rate and charges as a targeted rate to those receiving the service. B, number 2, small 2, stormwater rates to apply as they do currently, where the rural pays 20% of the stormwater rate. All in favour, hands up please. Yes, hands up, I expect nothing less. Pat and Bill moved it earlier. No, we've got 5 hands up. It's Kerry, Pat, Sandra, Isaac, Bill. Against, hands up. Everyone else. Not carried. I take you to the other paper, which is report 21128. There are recommendations on page 2. Do I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Sheldrake. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you. We are now going to move into public excluded. Moved by Councillor Bedette, seconded by myself. All in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you, Alice. We'll just take a 2-minute break while Alice packs up. What's that? Yeah, it's not going to take long. And then so they'll be only 4 or 5 minutes away for the workshop. And don't shoot away after the workshop. I've got a few updates to give you.